For 29 years, I was the disappointment of the family, until my wealthy parents suddenly offered $100,000 for my dream wedding. I thought they finally loved me. Then they handed me a standard agreement to sign. They didn't realize I make my living destroying predatory contracts, or that I was about to turn their public signing ceremony into the most humiliating night of their lives. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The nausea came in waves, rolling through my stomach and making the heavy scent of expensive truffles and aged steak nearly unbearable. I took a small sip of sparkling water, trying to steady my hands beneath the white tablecloth. I wasn't just physically ill, though the lingering fatigue from a bout of pneumonia 2 weeks ago still clung to my bones. I was emotionally fragile. I felt like a porcelain doll that had been glued back together too many times, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. "Ava, darling, are you even listening?" My mother's voice cut through the low hum of the restaurant. Diane sat across from me, perfectly poised, her silver hair coiffed into an immovable helmet of elegance. Beside her sat my father, Richard, a man who looked at his watch more often than he looked at his children. "I'm listening, Mom," I managed, forcing a weak smile. "I'm just still recovering. It's been a long month." "Well, perk up," Richard grunted, cutting into his filet mignon with surgical precision. "We didn't bring you to Le Cheval just to watch you mope. We have news, good news, for once." The "for once" hung in the air, a familiar stinging barb. I was 29 years old, a successful corporate contract attorney at a mid-sized firm, and happily engaged to a wonderful man named Mark. Yet, in the eyes of Richard and Diane, I was the perpetual underachiever. I wasn't a partner at a big law firm like their friends' children. I wasn't marrying a surgeon or a senator. I was marrying an architect who designed community centers rather than skyscrapers. "We've been discussing your wedding," Diane said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. She leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight. "We know you and Mark were planning something quaint. In a garden, was it?" "A botanical garden, yes," I said softly. "We want something intimate, small." Richard scoffed, a sharp, derisive sound. "Small means cheap, Ava, and people talk. They know who we are. They know who I am in this city. If my daughter gets married in a glorified greenhouse, it looks like we're destitute. It reflects poorly on the family brand." I felt the familiar prick of tears. I was almost 30, yet they still had the power to make me feel 6 years old and ashamed of a drawing I'd made. "It's what we can afford, Dad. We're paying for it ourselves." Diane reached across the table and placed her cold, manicured hand over mine. It was a rare gesture of physical contact, and it made me freeze. "That's what we want to change," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We want to help you. We want you to have the wedding you deserve, the wedding we deserve to host." Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, heavy checkbook. He placed it on the table but didn't open it yet. "We are prepared to cover the entire cost," Richard announced, his chest puffing out slightly. "A full 6-figure budget, $100,000. We'll book the grand ballroom at the St. Regis. We'll hire the orchestra, the catering, everything." The air left my lungs. $100,000. Mark and I had been scraping together savings for 2 years just to afford a $20,000 budget. This was life-changing. This was the kind of money that meant we wouldn't start our marriage in debt. It meant we could use our savings for a down payment on a house. But more than the money, it was the gesture. My parents were offering to do this for me, for us. Are you serious?" I stammered, looking from one to the other. "You do that." "We're tired of the distance, Ava," Diane sighed, looking genuinely wistful for a moment. "We want to be involved. We want to celebrate you. We want to welcome Mark properly into the family fold. We know we've been hard on you, but we want to start fresh." I felt a crack in my chest, a sudden release of tension I hadn't realized I was holding for decades. All I had ever wanted was their approval. All I wanted was to feel like I was actually their daughter, not just a disappointing investment. I don't know what to say, I whispered, blinking back tears. Thank you, I mean it. Thank you so much. Richard smiled, a genuine, toothy grin that I rarely saw directed at me. Good. It's settled then. We'll transfer the funds into a joint wedding account. You can start planning immediately. The only thing we ask is that you let your mother help with the vendor selection. She has expectations. Of course, I said quickly. Of course she can help. And, Richard added casually, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly, there's a small formality. Just a little agreement regarding the funds. Standard stuff for amounts this large. Tax implications, liability, that sort of thing. I'll have the office send it over next week. Sure, I said, too overwhelmed by the relief washing over me to think clearly. Whatever you need. I looked at them, really looked at them. They seemed softer, kinder. Maybe age was mellowing them. Maybe they finally realized that losing me wasn't worth their pride. I reached for my water again, but this time, my hand wasn't shaking. I felt a warmth spreading through me, a hope I hadn't felt since childhood. I should have known better. I should have remembered that Richard and Diane never gave gifts, they only made investments. And in their world, every investment expected a brutal return. As I walked out of the restaurant that night, shivering in the cool air but smiling, I pulled out my phone to call Mark. I was going to tell him our lives had changed. I was going to tell him my parents finally loved me. I didn't know it then, but that dinner was the beginning of a nightmare that would almost destroy my marriage before it even began. The betrayal wasn't just coming. It had already been plated and served, and I had swallowed it whole. The euphoria lasted for exactly 3 weeks. In those first 21 days, I felt like I was living in someone else's life. The crushing weight of financial anxiety that usually sat on my shoulders had vanished. Mark and I sat at our small kitchen table, not with calculators and furrowed brows, but with glossy bridal magazines and an iPad open to the St. Regis virtual tour. I still can't believe it, Mark said one evening, tracing the line of a velvet tuxedo in a brochure. Mark was a man of simple tastes. He loved raw timber, clean lines, and honest structures. He was 30, with messy sandy hair and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He was the anchor to my often stormy life. Ava, are you sure about this? It feels out of character for them. I know, I said, pouring us both a glass of cheap wine. But people change, Mark. Mom actually called me yesterday just to ask about color palettes. She didn't criticize my hair. She didn't ask if I'd gained weight. She just wanted to know if I preferred dusty rose or champagne gold. Mark looked at me, his expression guarded. And that makes you happy. It makes me feel like I have a mother, I admitted, my voice quiet. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm auditioning for the role of her daughter. I feel like I have the part. Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. Then I'm happy. If they treat you right, I'm all in. But if they make you cry, Ava, the deal is off. I don't care about the St. Regis. I'd marry you in a parking lot. I know, I smiled, leaning into his touch. But let's enjoy the luxury while we can. We dove into the planning. Or rather, Diane dove into the planning, and we were allowed to swim in her wake. Slowly, the dynamic began to shift. It started with small things. I wanted lilies. Diane insisted on orchids because lilies are for funerals, Ava, don't be morbid. I wanted a DJ. Richard insisted on a 12-piece orchestra because DJs are for high school proms. Whenever I pushed back, even gently, the temperature in the room would drop. Well, Diane would say, her voice icy, it is a significant investment we're making. We just want to ensure the quality matches the expenditure. Surely you understand. And I would fold. I folded because I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I folded because I was terrified that if I argued, the warmth would vanish and I'd be the disappointment again. I folded because, deep down, I was desperate to keep the peace. But the red flags were mounting. One afternoon, my Uncle Marcus came by my office for lunch. Marcus was Richard's older brother, but they couldn't have been more different. Marcus was a retired Superior Court judge, a man of immense integrity and warmth who had always been my secret ally in the family wars. He was 65 now, walking with a cane, but possessing a mind as sharp as a diamond cutter. We sat in a small deli near my firm, the noise of the lunch rush surrounding us. "Your father tells me the wedding is going to be the social event of the season," Marcus said, raising an eyebrow. "He's invited the mayor, and 3 developers he's trying to close deals with." I sighed, picking at my salad. "I know, it's becoming a bit of a production, but they're paying for it, Marcus. They're really trying to be supportive." Marcus looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Ava, your father doesn't support things, he buys them. Air is a distinction." "I think this is different," I insisted, though my conviction was wavering. "They just sent over the paperwork for the funds transfer. Dad said it's just a formality, a standard liability waiver." Marcus stopped eating. He put his fork down slowly. "You haven't signed it yet." "No, it arrived by courier this morning. It's on my desk. I haven't even looked at it." "Read it," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a judicial command. "Read it with your lawyer eyes, Ava, not your daughter eyes. Richard and Diane don't do formalities. They do contracts. And in a contract, there is always consideration. Quid pro quo. You think there are strings attached." "I think with Richard, there are never strings," Marcus said darkly. "There are chains." I tried to laugh it off, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. "You're being paranoid. It's probably just a tax document." "Maybe," Marcus said. He reached across and patted my hand, mirroring my mother's gesture from weeks ago, but his felt warm, protective. "Just promise me you'll read the definitions section. That's where they always hide the bodies." I went back to work that afternoon, but I couldn't focus. The large manila envelope sat on the corner of my desk, innocent and terrifying. "The wedding agreement," the cover letter said. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Diane. "Mom, make sure you sign the papers by Friday, darling. The venue needs the deposit, and your father can't release the funds until the legal team gives the green light. Love you." Love you. 2 words she had used more in the last month than in the previous 10 years. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the photo of Mark and me on my desk, our faces beaming. "It's just a formality," I whispered to myself. "Don't ruin this, Ava." But my training kicked in. I was a contract attorney. I spent my days dissecting corporate mergers and finding loopholes in liability clauses. I knew that in my world, words had power. Words defined reality. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy, thicker than a simple liability waiver should be. I slid it open with my letter opener. The sound was a sharp shhhk, like a warning hiss. I pulled out the document. It wasn't 2 pages. It was 20. Agreement regarding spousal union and familial assets. The title alone made my blood run cold. This wasn't a gift receipt. This was a governance document. As I turned the first page, a strange calm settled over me, the professional detachment I used when reviewing a hostile takeover bid. My heart was breaking, but my brain was waking up. But they had forgotten one crucial thing, I thought, my eyes scanning the dense legalese. They forgot that they paid for law school. I locked my office door. I turned off my phone. I grabbed a red pen. For the next hour, I didn't move. The only sound in the room was the scratching of my pen against the paper and the occasional sharp intake of my breath. What Richard and Diane had sent me wasn't an agreement. It was a deed of ownership. The document started deceptively simply, outlining the transfer of $100,000 for wedding-related expenses. But by page 3, the conditions of gift began. Clause 4.1, naming rights. The beneficiaries, Ava and Mark, agree that the firstborn male child of the union shall carry the name, Richard, as a first or middle name. The firstborn female child shall carry the name, Diane. Failure to adhere to this naming convention will result in a retroactive penalty equal to the principal sum of the gift plus interest. I stared at the words. They wanted to trademark my unborn children. I kept reading, my stomach churning with a mix of nausea and fury. Clause 7.3, Domicile and Holiday Visitation. The beneficiaries agree to spend no less than 75% of major holidays, defined as Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter, at the primary residence of the donors, Richard and Diane. This clause supersedes any obligations to the spouses, Mark's extended family. They were legally mandating that we abandon Mark's family. Mark, whose mother was a widow and lived for Christmas dinner, they wanted me to sign away his rights to see his own mother. But it was page 12 that made me physically gag. Clause 11, Spousal Business Equity. In consideration of the reputational boost provided by the donors, public endorsement of the marriage, the beneficiaries agree to grant Richard Holdings, LLC, a 15% non-voting equity stake in any business entities currently owned or founded in the future by the groom Mark. I threw the pen down. It bounced off the desk and clattered onto the floor. They didn't just want to control the wedding. They wanted to own Mark. They knew Mark had just started his own architecture firm. They knew it was struggling in the early stages but showed promise. Richard, being a real estate developer, clearly saw potential in Mark's designs but hated Mark's independence. This was a hostile takeover of my husband's career, disguised as a wedding gift. I sat back in my chair, trembling. The love of the past 3 weeks evaporated instantly. It was all a grooming process. They had buttered me up, made me feel safe, made me dependent on their money, all to slip a noose around my neck. A knock on the door made me jump. "Ava, you in there?" It was my assistant, panicked. "Your mother is on line 1, she says it's urgent." I looked at the phone blinking red. I picked it up, my hand shaking with rage. "Hello." "Ava," Diane's voice was bright, chirpy. "Did you get the packet? Your father is nagging me. He wants to wire the money tonight so we can lock down the florist." "I got it," I said, my voice sounding hollow, robotic. "Wonderful, just sign the back page, scan it, and email it over. You don't need to worry about the rest, it's just lawyer mumbo-jumbo. Standard boilerplate." Standard boilerplate. She was lying to my face. She knew exactly what was in there. Or worse, she didn't care, because to her, owning her children was just the natural order of things. "Mom," I said, testing the waters, "there are some specific clauses in here about Mark's business and future children." There was a pause, a beat of silence that lasted too long. "Oh, that," Diane said, her tone hardening instantly. "That's just insurance, Ava. Your father is a businessman. He's investing in your future. It's only right that the family has some security. Don't be difficult. We're giving you $100,000. Surely you can make a few concessions for family tradition." "Concessions?" I asked. "Mom, you're asking for equity in Mark's company." "Ava," she snapped, "do you want the wedding or not? Do you want to be humiliated in front of everyone when we have to cancel the St. Regis? Imagine what people will say. Poor Ava couldn't even make it to the altar without ruining it. Just sign the paper. Do it for us. Do it if you love us." The manipulation was so sharp, so practiced. She was weaponizing my fear of rejection. I need to show Mark," I said. "Don't you dare," Diane hissed. "This is family business. Mark isn't family yet. You sign it. You handle him. That's what a good wife does. She manages the household assets. If you show him, he'll just get emotional and misunderstand. This is between us." I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time. The sun began to set outside my window, casting long shadows across the document. I thought about Mark. I thought about his kindness, his patience, his laugh. If I signed this, I would be betraying him. I would be selling him out for a party. But if I refused outright, they would cancel the wedding. They would smear us. They would tell everyone I was ungrateful, that I had demanded more money, that I was unstable. They controlled the narrative in our social circle. They could ruin Mark's reputation in the city before his firm even got off the ground. Richard had that kind of power. I felt trapped, cornered. Then I looked at the document again. I looked at the sloppy drafting in Clause 14. I looked at the contradictory jurisdiction in Clause 22. My parents were arrogant. They used their in-house counsel, a guy named Steve who was a glorified yes-man and specialized in real estate zoning, not contract law. They thought I was just their daughter. They forgot I was a shark in my own right. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a professional capacity in years. "Uncle Marcus," I said when he answered. "You were right, I need your help, I'm coming over." "Bring the scotch," Marcus said immediately, "and bring the red pen." I arrived at Uncle Marcus's brownstone 20 minutes later, the contract tucked under my arm like a loaded weapon. Marcus was waiting in his study, a room lined with mahogany bookshelves and smelling of old paper and pipe tobacco. He didn't say a word as I handed him the document. He put on his reading glasses, poured 2 fingers of scotch for each of us, and began to read. I watched his face. At first, he was impassive. Then, his eyebrows knitted together. By page 10, he let out a low whistle. By the end, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. "This," Marcus said, his voice low and angry, "is unconscionable. In 40 years on the bench, I've seen prenuptials less draconian than this. Clause 11 alone acts as an illegal lien on future earnings." "They want me to hide it from Mark," I said, sipping the scotch to stop my shivering. "Mom said if I show him, the deal is off." "Of course she did," Marcus growled. "Because if Mark sees this, he'll tell them to go to hell and they lose their leverage. Ava, why are they doing this? Why now?" "Control," I said. "They want to control us." "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "Richard is a control freak, yes, but this is desperate. This reeks of urgency. He's locking down assets. Why does he need equity in a S? Mall architecture firm. Why does he need to ensure your children carry the family name so aggressively?" Marcus stood up and walked to his computer. "I'm going to make a few calls. I still have friends in the city clerk's office, and I know the zoning commissioner." "What are you looking for?" "Motive," Marcus said. While Marcus made his calls, speaking in hushed, authoritative tones, I sat at his desk and looked at the contract again. My lawyer brain was fully engaged now. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I began to draft. I wasn't drafting a refusal, I was drafting a trap. I opened a new document on my laptop. I retyped their contract word for word. I kept the font the same. I kept the formatting identical. I kept the headers, the footers, the page numbers. But I changed the definitions. In the definitions section, usually buried in fine print on page 2, I altered the definition of beneficiary and grantor. I changed Clause 11 from grantor receives 15% equity to grantor forfeits all claims to equity in exchange for reputational association. I utilized the contra pro frentem rule, the legal principle that any ambiguity in a contract is interpreted against the party that drafted it, but I was going a step further. I was creating a mirror contract. "Ava," Marcus turned from his phone, his face pale. "I found it." "Found what?" "Your father is leveraged to the hilt," Marcus said. "His latest development in the waterfront district is stalling. He needs a new line of credit, but the banks are wary. He needs to show diversified family assets to secure the loan. He needs Mark's firm on his books. Even if it's small, it's a clean asset. He's using your marriage to prop up his balance sheet." I stared at him. He's using us as collateral. "Essentially. And the wedding, the big gala at the St. Regis? It's a show. He's inviting his creditors. He wants to show them a stable, wealthy, united dynasty. If you walk away, the image crumbles. The loans might fall through." My blood turned to ice. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about simple control. It was a business transaction. I was a prop in a Ponzi scheme of reputation. "That settles it," I said, my voice steady. "I'm going to destroy them." "How?" Marcus asked. "If you refuse, he'll scorch the earth." "I won't refuse," I said, turning my laptop screen toward him. I'm going to sign, but I'm not signing their contract. I explained my plan. I would swap the pages. I would sign a version that looked identical but stripped them of all power and actually legally bound them to pay for the wedding without any recourse. I would execute the classic battle of the forms. But I needed a venue. I needed a witness. They want a signing ceremony, I said, remembering Diane's obsession with optics. They want to do a formal toast at the engagement party this weekend. Let them have it, Marcus grinned, a shark-like smile returning to his face. I'll be there. As a retired judge, I can notarize the document on the spot. It adds gravitas. And when they try to enforce it later, they'll realize they signed a document that legally gifted you $100,000 with zero strings attached. And by the time they figure it out, the money will already be spent and the wedding over. No, I said, I don't want their money anymore. I want to expose them. I want to wait until the moment is right. The engagement party, Marcus nodded. Saturday night, all his investors will be there. I saved the document. Uncle Marcus, can you print this on the same heavy bond paper they use? I can do better, he said. I can match the watermark. I stood up. The victim was gone. The strategist had arrived. Friday morning, I walked into my parents' estate. The house was a mausoleum of marble and gold leaf, cold and imposing. Diane was in the sunroom, directing a team of florists. Richard was on a call, pacing aggressively. When he saw me, he hung up. Did you bring it? He barked. No hello. No how are you? I have it, I said, holding up the folder. But I have questions. Questions? Richard's face reddened. We discussed this, Ava. It's standard. I know, I said, keeping my voice meek. But Clause 11, Mark is worried. You showed him, Diane shrieked, dropping a vase of hydrangeas. I had to mention the business part, I lied. He's asking why you need equity. Richard stormed over to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and desperation. Because I am paying for everything. Do you have any idea what this wedding costs? Do you think money grows on trees? I am making you a star, Ava. I am giving that boy a platform. He should be thanking me on his knees for 15%. I should ask for 50%. It just feels excessive, I murmured, looking down. It is the price of admission, Richard yelled. You want to be part of this family. You want the inheritance. You want the status. You pay the toll. Sign the damn paper or get out. And if you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. I'll cut you off. I'll write you out of the will. I'll make sure Mark never gets a contract in this town again. There it was, the threat, naked and ugly. I looked at Diane. She was watching, her eyes cold. She wasn't going to save me. She was his partner in crime. Okay, I whispered, letting a tear fall. I was a good actress when I needed to be. Okay, Daddy, I'll sign. I want everyone to be happy. Richard relaxed instantly. He smoothed his suit jacket. Good girl, that's my reasonable girl. Now give it here. No, I said, clutching the folder to my chest. Not here. You said you wanted a ceremony? At the engagement party tomorrow? Let's do it there, in front of everyone. It will show unity. It will show the investors how strong the family is. Richard's eyes lit up. He was imagining the optics, a public signing, a display of dominance and benevolence combined. It was catnip to his narcissism. Excellent idea, he beamed. We'll do it right before the toast, a formal merging of families. Uncle Marcus can oversee it. Perfect, I said. I'll bring the papers. I want to put them in a nice binder. Fine, fine. Just make sure it's signed by tomorrow night. I walked out of the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. They had taken the bait. They were so blinded by their own ego, so confident in my submission, that they didn't see the knife I was holding behind my back. I called Mark from the car. Mark, do you trust me? With my life, he said immediately. I need you to be brave tomorrow night. It's going to get ugly, but I promise you we win. Ava, what are you doing? I'm negotiating, I said. Saturday arrived with an ominous gray sky. The engagement party was being held at the breathless Sky Lounge atop one of the city's tallest hotels. Ironically, one Richard didn't own, which seemed to irk him. The guest list had ballooned to 200 people. Half of them were strangers to me, bankers, investors, city council members, the people Richard needed to impress. I wore a dress I had bought myself, a sharp, architectural midnight blue gown that made me feel like armor. Mark looked handsome in his tux, but his jaw was tight. He knew something was coming, but he didn't know the details. I had kept him in the dark to protect his genuine reaction. I needed him to be honestly shocked when the truth came out. As we entered the room, flashbulbs popped. Richard had hired a society photographer. "Smile," Diane hissed, gripping my arm with painful force. "The vice mayor is here. Stand up straight." We circulated. I played the role of the blushing bride-to-be. I accepted congratulations. I nodded when Richard introduced Mark as my protégé. I saw Mark wince, but he held his tongue for me. Uncle Marcus was in the corner, nursing a soda water. He gave me a microscopic nod. He had the revised document in his briefcase under the table. But as the night wore on, the tension became suffocating. Richard was drinking heavily, his volume increasing. He was holding court, telling stories that painted him as the benevolent patriarch rescuing his struggling daughter. She was living in a shoebox, I heard him tell a group of investors. Talented girl, but no head for business. I told her, "Ava, let Daddy handle the heavy lifting. We're going to bring her husband's little firm in-house, make it a real company." The investors nodded, impressed. Richard was selling assets he didn't own yet. Then I saw something that made my blood boil. Diane was showing a photo on her phone to a group of women. I moved closer. "Yes, and the nursery is already being designed," she was saying. "We're going to name the baby Richard II. It's already decided." She was talking about a baby that didn't exist, enforcing a contract I hadn't signed yet. They truly believed they owned us. They believed I was a nonentity. I caught Mark's eye. He looked ready to punch someone. I walked over and took his hand. "Wait," I whispered. "Almost time." The music stopped. Richard tapped a spoon against his champagne glass. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard boomed, standing on a small dais. "Thank you for coming. Tonight is about love, but it's also about family legacy." He beckoned me and Mark to the stage. We walked up. The lights were blinding. "In our family," Richard continued, "we believe in supporting one another. Diane and I are thrilled to not only fund this magnificent wedding, but to formally welcome Mark into the Richard Holdings family. We have prepared a special covenant to mark this occasion." He gestured to the side table, where a velvet-covered document holder lay. "Ava," he said, handing me a heavy gold pen, "shall we make it official?" This was it. He expected me to sign the prop document he had placed there, the one with the slavery clauses. "Actually, Dad," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone, "I brought my own copy, the one we discussed." Richard frowned slightly, but he couldn't argue in front of the crowd. "It's the same document, yes." "It's the agreement regarding the wedding funds and future assets," I said clearly. "Uncle Marcus has reviewed it." Marcus stepped forward, limping onto the stage with his cane. He looked every inch the judge. "I have the document here," Marcus said, pulling the papers from his briefcase. He placed them on the table. Richard hesitated. He looked at Marcus, then at me, but the crowd was watching. The vice mayor was watching. He couldn't cause a scene. He assumed I was just being particular about the paper quality. "Fine," Richard muttered. "Sign it." I picked up the pen, but I didn't sign. I turned to the microphone. "Before I sign," I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady, "I think it's important that everyone here understands exactly what my parents are so generously offering. Transparency is key in business, isn't it, Dad?" Richard's smile faltered. "Ava, just sign the damn thing." "I will," I said, "but first let's read Clause 4. The room was dead silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I opened the folder Marcus had placed on the table, but I didn't read from my revised version yet. I pulled out the original draft, the one Richard had sent me. I had kept it hidden under the revised one. Clause 4, I read aloud, projecting my voice to the back of the room. The beneficiaries agree that the firstborn male child shall be named Richard. Failure to adhere to this naming convention will result in a financial penalty of $100,000 plus interest. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. I looked at Mark, his jaw dropped. He stared at Richard with pure horror. "Ava," Richard hissed, stepping forward. "Stop this." Clause 7, I continued, talking over him. The couple must spend Christmas, Thanksgiving, and Easter exclusively with the donors. Visitation with the groom's family is prohibited without written consent. The murmurs turned to gasps. I looked at Diane. She was pale, clutching her pearls. "And my favorite," I said, turning to the group of investors Richard had been courting. Clause 11. The groom agrees to transfer 15% equity of his architecture firm to Richard Holdings, LLC, in exchange for exposure. I looked directly at the vice mayor. Is that standard practice for family gifts in this city? "That's enough," Richard roared. He lunged for the microphone, but Mark stepped in between us. Mark, the quiet architect, stood like a stone wall. "Don't touch her," Mark said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was dangerous. "You ungrateful little witch," Diane screamed from the side. "After everything we offered you." "You offered me a purchase order," I yelled back, finally letting the anger break through. "You didn't want a daughter. You wanted an asset. You wanted to leverage Mark's business to secure your loans because you're overextended on the waterfront project." The room exploded. The investors looked at each other, alarmed. The diversified assets lie was exposed. "That's a lie," Richard shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's unstable. She's been sick." "I have the contract right here." I waved the papers. "And I have Uncle Marcus, a retired Superior Court judge, who can attest to its validity." Marcus stepped up to the mic. He didn't need to shout. "I reviewed the document drafted by Richard's counsel," he said solemnly. "It is a predatory instrument designed to strip these young people of their autonomy and property. It is legally unconscionable and morally bankrupt." The judgment of a judge carries weight. The crowd began to back away from Richard and Diane. The investors were already pulling out their phones, likely texting their risk management teams. Richard looked around, realizing he was losing the room. He turned on me, his face twisted in hate. "You are nothing without me. You can't afford this wedding. You can't afford a house. I will crush you." I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was free. "You're right, Dad. I can't afford your wedding, so I don't want it." I took the contract, both copies, and ripped them in half. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I ripped them again and again until they were just confetti. I threw the pieces at his feet. "I'm not for sale," I said, "and neither is my husband." I took Mark's hand. "Let's go." We walked down the center aisle of the room. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. I didn't look back. I just heard Diane sobbing and Richard shouting impotent threats into a dead microphone. We walked out of the hotel and into the cool night air. My adrenaline crashed and my knees buckled. Mark caught me. He pulled me into a hug that squeezed the breath out of me. "I am so proud of you," he whispered into my hair. "I am so proud of why." "Oh." "I'm sorry," I sobbed, burying my face in his chest. "I'm sorry about the money. I'm sorry about the wedding." "Ava," he laughed, a sound of pure relief. "I'd rather get married at the courthouse tomorrow than take a dime from those people. You saved us." And we did exactly that. 3 days later, we got married at City Hall. Uncle Marcus was our witness. Afterward, we went to a dive bar with our 10 closest friends. I wore a white cocktail dress I bought off the rack for $200. We ate pizza and drank beer. It cost us about $500 total. It was the best wedding I could have imagined. The fallout for my parents was swift and brutal. The investors who were at the party pulled out of the waterfront deal within 48 hours. Word spreads fast in high society, and nobody wants to do business with a man who tries to swindle his own children publicly. Richard's company took a massive hit, and he's currently facing audits from 3 different agencies. Apparently, Uncle Marcus knew a few more people than he let on. Diane tried to call me once, leaving a voicemail blaming me for ruining the family name. I didn't listen to the end. I blocked the number. I haven't spoken to them since. Mark's firm is doing well. Ironically, the story of what happened got around, and he picked up a few clients who respected a man who stood up to a bully like Richard. We don't have a mansion. We don't have a trust fund. We are paying our mortgage slowly, month by month. But the house is ours, the business is ours, and our future children, they will have whatever names we choose. I looked at the contract one last time in my mind before letting it fade. They tried to use the law to bind me, not realizing that the law was my sword, not my shackle. I broke the chain, and for the first time in my life, I am truly, completely free.